one of the things that's come up a lot when I've been doing our workshops on emotional well-being is when I've asked people, like, what do you do to take care of your own emotional well-being? The kind of list that has come up has been things like going for a run or going for a walk, going to the gym, taking the dog for a walk, like stroking the dog. Loads and loads of the things that people talk about are actually things that they do physically, often
Yes.
involving movement, sometimes involving elevating heart rate, but not always. Often it's more just about moving, getting up and moving. For me, I'll just get up and walk around sometimes, or I quite like to, if I need to relax, then I'll often lie on the floor.
Okay.
I not really do yoga, but there's probably some aspect of kind of yoga practice that I'm doing in that. But it's just really fascinating how often people
Yeah.
are doing things that are movement based or physically based when they're trying to attend to their emotional well-being. So that's kind of come up tons.
Yes. Yeah. That's really important. And like, I think as well, people maybe will still try and separate the two, don't they? Emotional well-being and physical well-being. But then sort of intuitively, don't you, that they're sort of inextricably linked. And
Yeah,
it's
definitely. And it's interesting you say like intuitively that, because I think that people do, and I think that over like the last 5-10 years that's kind of got a bit better. I mean, people realizing that, but now there's a much better recognition of everything being linked together.
There is, and like in schools especially, like obviously PE is driven quite strongly, and always has been, and it's part of the curriculum, and it's got its own like curriculum area and curriculum leads and things like that. And then wellbeing has come in the last few years and quite strongly, but almost separately to it. So I think what we have to do, especially in schools, is to bring them together and make it explicit as well for the pupils and the staff, that those two things come in tandem.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, this is part of, we were just talking earlier on about the NHS 5 steps, weren't we? And one of those is about keeping active and movement. So that's what you find on the NAC website, is really how to put those 5 steps into practice, because what might that look like for somebody who's got a severe and profound intellectual disability and perhaps a complex physical need as well? Their way of accessing movement experiences might need to look a bit different to going down the gym.
Yeah. It will look different to us, won't it? But it still has the same or similar benefits and past just physical health, like we've just spoken about, and into things like agency and taking control over your body and your environment, and sort of expressing who you are as a person. And that's why lots of the stuff on the NAC website is important, because it is about dance, so that expression is there, isn't it? But that's sort of linked to more things physical than just expressive arts.
Yeah, but I love what you said there about agency, and that's kind of really struck me as well, how often, as well as the fact that we do things that are physical to support our emotional well-being, very often we do get that massive sense of accomplishment out of things that we do that are physical. So not anymore, because I've had problems with my back over the years, which is fine now, but I intend to keep it that way. But in the past, I used to go to the gym a lot, and even though I'm quite tiny, I used to lift quite heavy weights. But when you kind of start to up the weight, you get this massive sense of achievement. I remember being able to do, like, I think 1 chin up or something. It wasn't particularly impressive, but for me it was like,
Yeah.
I could do that before, and now once I've achieved that sense of being able to do something with my body, and that so links to what you were just saying about agency.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. And I mean, I say to my partner that if I do a long run first thing in the morning, then for the rest of the day I get to feel smug, and I do. I just feel proud of myself and hold my head up high, and then it resets the next day. But I definitely do get that sort of sense from it.
Yeah, so it's not just about the fact that you've kind of perhaps released some endorphins through the running.
Yeah, it definitely does. And you can, that those sort of that there are chemical elements, aren't there, to exercise, and
Yeah,
the hormones that go through you, and you like there's that anxiety comes down, and sort of stress hormones come down as well.
but you also feel good because you've achieved something.
Achieve something, and you're out in the world, and it's you, and you get a different sense at you. And even like on long runs, if like a different part of you hurts than it did the day before, then you've got this like sense of who you are, and pushing yourself and achieving, and your sort of sense of self.
Yeah.
And if you had PMOD and that sort of sense of movement, it's and again, it's on the website, isn't it, about the proprioceptive sense and where you are in the world. And um it's just really, really important for your sense of self and agency. and those sorts of things come, and we've spoken about the dance, haven't we? If you're doing that sort of movement with somebody else, and that touch as well, that's where you end and where somebody else starts, and yeah, it's all links together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking then about a young lady that I used to work with, and I'd known her for about, been working with her quite intensely for about 8 months, at which point she started to move her hand,
Oh,
and that was just amazing. And I just think that for us, yeah, it might be being able to do a chin up or whatever they're called, or run 5 miles or something. But for her to be able to move her hand was huge, and you wonder, before, did she know that her hand was even there? And we don't know, do we? We don't know how much she could even sense that.
no, we don't. And again, if you come back to sort of intuition, sort of beyond training and things, and go back to sort of developmental steps, when a baby first finds their foot and like puts it into their mouth, everybody in the room sort of celebrates, don't they? Everybody knows that this is like a step to go towards it. It's an important thing for that person, and they sort of giggle, don't they? They're like, they've suddenly found out that they've got feet, and then they've found out that they've got, you know, what else they've got. But it's developmentally, we sort of intuitively know that it's an important step.
Yeah, that's really, and I wonder if we do that enough. Do we celebrate those moments enough where someone might be moving in a different way to they have before, or more, or moving a different part of their body?
And
Sure.
do we celebrate enough, and do we track it properly, and do we share it with everybody who needs to know? Probably not.
Yeah, that's definitely an area to think about. And another area that I'm really interested in is this whole idea that not just that our emotions affect our body and our body positioning and what we do with our body, but also that our body can influence our emotions. So there's some kind of like quite interesting little experiments that you can do with yourself, and one of them I think most people will have heard of is this idea that when you smile, it can make you feel happy. I'll be honest, sometimes I try that and it doesn't work. Or it doesn't feel like it works, but sometimes it might just take the edge off a little bit. If I'm feeling kind of really down, occasionally I've tried that and it never makes me feel worse, I've got to be honest, so that's good. But whether it actually like suddenly makes me feel happy, maybe not, but it might help a little bit. But I do think there's things kind of posturally as well that, and immediately I say posture, I start to shift it, to fix the posture. But I'm really interested in this idea that when your posture can affect your emotions and how you feel, and whether we realise that when we're thinking about how we support position and posture for people with disabilities who maybe can't control that themselves, or actually sometimes how we might prevent people from being in the posture that they need to be in by perhaps like trying to get them to sit in chairs or trying to get them to be still when they need to move. All those kind of things I think are interesting. But the couple that I'm thinking of that you can try is, one of them is where you kind of hunch over, so you just like drop your head out. Have a go if you want, Karen, don't if you don't want to. So you like hunch your shoulders over, so that your chin is kind of dropped towards your chest. And just kind of sense from, and try that people watching this maybe want to try it as well. Just stay in that position for a few moments and kind of see how that makes you feel. So really make sure those shoulders are kind of hunched over and your head is down. So you're looking towards your lap. And take that moment just to kind of notice how you feel. And then when you're ready, in no rush, you might want to just sit upright again and pull your shoulders back, not force them, but just have them back naturally. Lift your head so your chin's nice and up and your spine is nice and straight and erect, and maybe make sure that your gaze is, maybe look away from the screen for a moment and just make sure your gaze is looking outwards and upwards slightly, and just notice how you feel again, and if there's any difference to how you felt when you were in the hunched position. And any thoughts, Karen?
Yes, yeah. Well, I think as soon as I came up, I felt lighter. I felt more myself, actually, which is strange. And when I had my chin down, I sort of immediately felt isolated. I felt like the world was smaller, and that I existed maybe a bit more on my own.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting, and that's quite similar to what some of the research around that shows, is that you genuinely can feel more depression in those kind of postures, and have more negative thoughts, so they can be quite kind of associated. And I think that works both ways. You can end up in those positions because you're perhaps depressed or lacking in confidence and so on, but also by changing the posture and positioning could help to bring us up and help us to feel better and happier and more confident. So often like that, you'll get that advice when if you're giving a presentation or doing something, that going for an interview, stand up straight and have your shoulders back and all those things, and it does kind of open you up and makes you feel like, yeah, I've got perhaps some kind of power in the world.
Yes, yeah, I definitely feel like that, don't you?
Yeah.
And there's a link here, isn't there, to sort of regular movement as well. And the more regular movement is, the sort of better your posture is likely to be. A bit like you were talking about the people who go to the gym regularly, they might tend to stand up a bit taller, or yeah. So there's definitely links for that, aren't there, to other things that we've spoken about.
Yeah, and could that be confidence related as well, that if you know those people who perhaps do go to the gym might feel a bit more confident about their body and in their body, and therefore actually happy to show and be. But I just wonder how much we are aware of that when we're supporting people. I think that a lot of people really understand the need to support posture for physical reasons, but they're understanding there could be this link for an emotional reason as well. I just think that's something that could be explored more by practitioners.
I think so. I think probably what practitioners understand is reading body, posture a bit potentially, so they might know that the people that they're working with, that their mood is lower than it normally is based on their posture. They might not know the link the other way around necessarily.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that while you're saying that, I'm thinking, and I'm definitely not suggesting that we should be saying to people, right, stand up straight because if they're telling us, I feel down and this is how I'm telling you, then that's what we need to tune into and respond. Oh, you look like you're feeling down, and make sure that empathy is given first, but then also think about, well, can we do something physical active to kind of get out of that, perhaps that quite stuck posture and maybe that stuck emotion too.
Absolutely.
Like validate the emotion first, don't deny it. Or
validate, attune, and then take a step back and think about what their day looks like and what movement is sort of planned into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's some other little bits that I'd like to think about in terms of positioning more actually, which is related to movement, I think. And one of the biggies for me, and I'd be interested, Karam, if you've got any reflections on this as well. I hate having my back to the door. It's just that I will never sit somewhere or position my desk or a chair or however I'm positioning and laying out my room. I would never like to sit with my back to the door. It just feels so, I think it's just vulnerable. I feel so vulnerable. So
yeah, it is. It's vulnerable, and I think sometimes it's exclusionary as well. I think I got that feeling when I first started teaching, and I'd sit and do my planning in the morning, and the teaching assistants would come in. If they'd come in from behind me, and I noticed that their response to me was different to when I turned my chair the other way, and they'd walk in, and it was more welcoming, and it was more. Maybe they thought I was more available to them, and those interactions were better. They were happier, and there was definitely more of a connection. That in terms of positioning, it definitely has an impact.
Yeah, so we can do some quite simple things there just to check and think about where are people, particularly perhaps if they're in a wheelchair and we're choosing where they're going to sit. Can we just make sure that they're sat somewhere that's going to give them the best position in the room to support how they feel about themselves and how they feel about themselves in their space?
Yeah, absolutely, and that depends on each individual, doesn't it? So I was just thinking about when you said where we sit people who are in chairs. They might be super sociable and like a bit nosy and love to see what's going on, and they might want to sit facing out, and other people might find that a bit overwhelming and want to sit the way. So it's about knowing the people that you work with.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And whether people want to be not whether they want to be, I'm sure that most people don't want to be, but the thing about approaching from behind as well, I think that's still something we need to be really careful and cautious about, how that would feel to have someone kind of come up to you when you can't see them, or don't know they're coming up towards you.
Definitely, and it also means that we're talking about those signs about mood, doesn't it? I mean, if you're approaching from behind, you're much less likely to have read them and to understand how they are at that moment, and it's about coming forward, isn't it? And that's part of agency as well. If they haven't got the ability, or you haven't given them the ability to for them to let you know how they are at that time, you sort of reduce their agency a little bit, and to increase their agency, you could approach them from the front and read them and see whether it's the right time to talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking that we probably need to think about moving, because we've been sat at the
Yeah.
spot for a while. So I'm trying to be really careful on anything on the screen, that we don't sit for too long. But was there anything else that we wanted to say? We've talked about keeping active and release of endorphins, improving mood. Covered quite a few areas, haven't we? And of course, there's more on the website that people can look at to refer to.
Yeah, there's much more detail, isn't there, on the website, sort of maybe more scientific detail. I think maybe we haven't talked about like learning, potentially the impact, the impact of movement on learning. But I think that's maybe quite more well known, isn't it, with brain breaks and dough disco and stuff like that.
Oh, it's so relevant. And in terms of, are you thinking about partly about being regulated, using movement to ensure that we're well regulated? Yeah, so building in movement breaks perhaps within sessions if it's at school, or ensuring regular movement at home.
Yeah, and like we talk about regulation, it's on the website we talk about it being calming. It definitely is.
Yeah, I guess it could be either, couldn't it? It could be a way of, it could be stimulating as well. It's so individual. Some people might need to move to wake themselves up and to feel stimulated and literally to feel alive. I know for me during COVID and being a little bit sort of stuck at home at some of those times when we were really in lockdown, I would just find myself walking around my living room, which is quite small, and my husband sort of looking at me, and I just was saying to him, I just need to move. I think that was all it was. I just felt that need to move, and we discharge and expel a lot of energy through doing that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we absolutely do. But like you said, it can be, if we're working with people who have difficulties regulating, then we need to regulate it for them a little bit and help them. So doing too much movement, like you said, can work the other way.
So it's kind of watching the signs, making sure that the arousal levels aren't getting too high.
Yeah, absolutely, and what you're doing what are you doing in that movement, sort of. I know my other occupational therapists at school would be asking me to be very cautious about what kind of movement we're doing, if they're doing any sort of heavy work within that, and what impact it's going to have on their sort of sensory systems.
Of course, yeah, making sure that physiotherapy, occupational therapy are involved in terms of keeping people safe from a sensory point of view, physical point of view. We don't want to be overstretching, over pushing.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So so we'd welcome people to kind of have a look at the website, and I guess as well, we really welcome people to add their ideas and thoughts to what would make for good movement activities for people who might struggle with their range of movement. I think we've still got a lot of scope to add to our resources in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And the expertise lies with people that are working or living with people with SPMLD, doesn't it? So any advice, it's about sharing knowledge, isn't it? And lots of people will have got things wrong and changed it to get it better and better and better, and that sort of stuff is, the more that's shared, the better it is for everybody.
Definitely. Brilliant. Oh, it's really good to talk to you.
Yes, and you.
Okay. I couldn't find this.